Hey, good evening. We are Team Deck. My name is Jackson. This is Alyssa, Troy, Celine, and Sarianne. And we were charged by Army Futures Command to study Army implications for enhanced deception capabilities in the future battle space. So why is deception important? Why is this something that the Army and decision makers should care about right now? Ground forces are vulnerable to detection and long-range fires. The proper use of deception, however, can have game-changing effects on the battlefield and, most importantly, save lives. For the Army to survive against adversaries armed with multi-domain sensors and lethal weapons deployed from long ranges, they need to be able to deploy deception tactics and technology. Thankfully, the Army recognizes that the projected capabilities of future battle spaces and that deception will, in fact, be used by our enemies and near-peer adversaries. We took a multi-domain approach to this challenge, completing 87 interviews across many different domains, including within the military, with our active and retired officers across many branches, academics at William & Mary, West Point and UC Berkeley, most notably military ethicists, private sector professionals, and also site visits to the Pentagon and Langley Air Force Base.
So here's our final mission model canvas. On the right, you see the beneficiaries who are most important to our project, all correlating to our value propositions, which include investment in deception, training, and technology, so troops can be successfully deployed and protected on the transparent battlefield. Our mission achievement involves officer and NCOs applying these deception lessons learned into their training so they can successfully deploy their troops. This slide represents a deception trajectory over the years. During the Cold War and World War II, we had more of a focus on deception techniques and tactics, such as Patton's Ghost Army, to go against our near-peer threats at the time, the Soviet Union. Since then, our deception capabilities have declined since we've entered the war on terror and have primarily been up against insurgencies and terrorist organizations. And you can see by the picture in the middle, our operations are completely overt. So for today and beyond, we need to focus on social media usage and signal management and hygiene. So when our troops are deployed onto this transparent battlefield, they know how to protect themselves.
We originally thought of this problem similarly with the other groups, where we started with looking at deficiencies in technology. We talked a lot with future concepts individuals and people with and engineers. Unfortunately, however, we don't have a lot of security clearance, and a lot of the questions we were asking, they couldn't tell us. And another great thing about the United States is that there's a strong private sector already working on a lot of these deception problems. So our initial MVP was a deception research database. However, there were a lot of security clearance issues again, and a problem with kind of who was running it and how do you get people to buy into that problem. That led to our lack of buy-in issue, which led to our next MVP, which is a deception roundtable where individuals would come together and talk about deception improvements and needs. There's an organization that was like this already called the Fortis Denial and Deception Committee, or the FDDC. However, that fizzled out during the war on terror, something that Sarianne already talked about as well. That then led to our final pivot, which was the lack of training, and that was because of something that we've been hearing from a lot of individuals and throughout the interview process as well.
So that leads us to our solution, or our minimum viable product, which is to have a baseline deception capability for all soldiers in the U.S. Army. We know that there isn't going to be some magic technology that can conceal all of our forces. There's no miracle tactic that can do this, and we can always use more experts, but that's not going to be enough. What we need is for the fundamentals of deception to be understood by every soldier in the Army. We interviewed a former Army member who went on to be a colonel in Special Forces, and when asked about current Army deception training, he responded, "I would say it's nowhere." We were able to get away with that during the war on terror because our forces were so superior, but if we go up against peer or near-peer adversaries, our losses will be devastating. So our solution, we need to incorporate deception more into basic training, officers and NCO training, and evaluations at combat training centers. Next slide. So basic training, individual soldiers don't need to know exactly how deception tactics work, but they do need to know their personal responsibility for keeping themselves and their unit masked. We hear there's widespread problems throughout soldiers with our soldiers in the Army with posting on social media, using their phones in the field, watching Netflix in the bases. And we're seeing consequences of this kind of behavior playing out in Ukraine right now. Russian soldiers using apps where Ukrainians can access the data, and moments later they're destroyed by Ukrainian artillery. We can't let that be us. So we need to instill a personal sense of responsibility for every soldier in the Army, that they need to keep their own signals masked. They need to keep their own sensitive information that they have access to classified. And to do that, we need to teach this idea of signal hygiene in basic training and return to this Cold War culture of secrecy that we've heard a lot of our experts talk about, this mindset that we're always being watched and we need to keep our signals and our information secret. Next, we need to teach excuse me for a moment. Okay, so we don't need more deception experts per se, but we do need our officers to understand fundamentals of deception. Right now, all of the deception courses at military academies, especially for the Army, are electives. And the officer we spoke to before who said that this training was non-existent also said that he didn't even learn the basics of deception until he was a major. So that's unacceptable. We need to have these basic tactics taught in basic officers and NCOs training, and that includes feints, demonstrations, ruses, and displays. These can be critical in dealing with long-range fires. Using decoys, which is included in those tactics, can misallocate enemy resources, force them to waste time differentiating between real and fake targets, and even waste ammunition against false targets. Next, they need to be taught not just these basic tactics, but how to think creatively about deception. If we're just using the same tactics over and over again, the enemy will catch on. So we need to be constantly adapting and learning. So they need to be taught here with this do, think, see model or similar models for thinking about how deception works. What do you want the enemy to do? What do they have to think in order to do that? And what do they have to see in order to think that? And if we can get our officers and NCOs thinking about this creatively, constantly adapting, they'll be able to adapt faster than the enemy can, and our tactics will stay fresh, and the enemy won't be able to change their tactics in time.
And finally, we want to evaluate the effectiveness of this training at combat training centers like JRTC and NTC. And we'll do this by linking passage or failure to a unit's ability to deceive red team sensors. And not only will this help gauge the effectiveness of our training, it'll also create commander buy-in. So if they know they're going to be evaluated based on this, they're going to emphasize it with their troops. You can see up in the left-hand corner, they're already doing some of this at NTC. So this is what a command post looks like at NTC. But what we've heard from folks we speak to there is that the red team is repeatedly winning because we're failing to mask our electromagnetic signals. But in the words of a senior Army officer we spoke to at NTC, how can we start focusing on as advanced a topic as deception when some units are still learning to tie their shoes? What we hope to convince them of is that deception is as basic as tying your shoes, because it's the difference between life and death on the battlefield. So how do we get this done? We imagine deployment in 3 phases. During the first phase, Army Futures Command will commission a call report on deception failures in Nagorno-Karabakh and Ukraine. They'll also submit 21st century deception training as a topic for the Army Lessons Learned Forum, and TRADOC will begin to design and implement training updates. In the second phase, the Army Futures Command will stand up an integrated project team to discuss developments in the United States and our adversaries' capabilities, so we can continue to stay agile in the face of an evolving battlefield. And finally, in the third phase, a call will produce a report on the successes and failures of the initial round of deception training, and that will be used to shape future training programs. We want to emphasize that while changing training is our long-term goal, the most important thing we can do right now is raise awareness about this issue. Thank you.